is a negotiation of values. And so I ask all of you today to suspend your desire to design immediately. Allow yourself to reflect on what you're hearing. And in discussion with Patrick yesterday, I summarised your activities today as really finding the space between, finding that is yet to be discovered. Go into the unknown. That is where design is the most exciting. And before you graduate, allow yourself to go there, because it might be the last chance you have for a little bit of time once you get out into practice. So I wish you all the best. Congratulations once again. Welcome to our guests, and I can't wait to hear and see how today's collaboration extends into your work across the rest of term. So congratulations, Patrick, and thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. I'll just do a short welcome. We've got people from literally all over the world. I see Louis Parsons O'Malley from Hull in the UK sitting there on screen. It's about 1 o'clock at night. Sam's, I don't even know, wherever Tenterfield is. We've got people up down in Wollongong and in Newcastle, and certainly around. So just welcome to everyone, and I'll keep it at that for now, and we'll go into a little bit more detail as people present and through the plenary sessions and the redemption game. So we might jump straight to Sherelle. Last year's studio focus was on White Bay, which is a similar but different, I have to say, site. But I wanted us to have an opportunity to look at the top 3 student projects from that year. So no pressure there, Sherelle, but you've got about 10 minutes, and if you can do it in 9, you get extra smiles from me.
Really?
So do you want to go for that?
Just jump up. Where would be the best place for me to stand to present all this?
It's pretty good. Where are you?
We can see you online, Sherelle, from where you are now. Yeah.
Is this being shared already?
So you'll just share, go back to Teams and share.
Yep. We've done this a million times, haven't we?
Yes. Getting better at it.
Brilliant. Just checking that everyone online can see that as well.
That's coming through, Sherelle.
And I'm on this camera, am I? It's like a production, isn't it?
Hilarious. It's hilarious.
Yeah, so I've been invited here today to share my graduation project. I believe you guys are all going through that right now. So I was literally sitting in your seats this time last year. So yeah, I also want to extend out any if you have any questions or need any help with anything, myself and the rest of my gear group are so here for you guys. We were literally in your seats last year. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me or anyone else that you know is in the year above, so I can put you in touch with someone with a similar project or something like that. So yeah, we started with a great acknowledgement of country already. Our site, White Bay Power Station, and the White Bay Precinct is on the land of the Gadigal Wangal peoples. So yeah, to echo Jamie's great acknowledgement of country prior. So my design proposal entangled design, light, shadow, and tides. And we named it Kelp, I'm Drowning. So Kelp, I'm Drowning questions and explores the design of aquaculture in the public realm. We see how the crossing of marine habitats and farming with infrastructure, public places, and civic amenities reveals how aquacultural landscapes may mesh food, production, recreation, ecology, and waste management. So with currently 17.7 tonnes of heavy metals distributed into Sydney Harbour annually through stormwater alone, it is proposed to take 92 years for natural processes to return the levels to 2 times pre-Anthropocene levels. To add to this, we see the past uses of power production and other industries have also left its deep residue of pollutants to the White Bay Power Station. So therefore, we cannot be redeemed by natural systems alone. To mitigate these levels of toxins and heavy metals leaching to Sydney Harbour every year, something more has to happen. So today we asked, what if the site limits become site opportunities of regeneration? What happens when we transform our thinking to see the copious amount of contaminants into a highly nutritious aliment to be taken advantage of? Similarly, this thinking is applied to sea level rise and intertidal habitats. So as the sea level rises, it will lead to the reclamation of intertidal habitats. So again, we ask, how can this be taken advantage of? So to get into the design proposal, the design strategy involves 3 phases: cultivate, propagate, and infiltrate. Each phase will be introduced at each rise of sea level. Each 1 meter rise of sea level. So to get into phase 1, we introduce system 1.1, tap it into the flow, where salvaged oyster shells collected from the nearby Sydney fish markets will be used to grow a forest of sheet oaks at the forecourt of the White Bay Power Station. So this creating a network of routes will buffer and filter the contaminated groundwater leaching into the harbour. Studying the historical landform gives us clues to the saturated marshland soil, which sits beneath the concrete and fill. So in order to grow a forest of she oaks on an expansive concrete slab, it starts with oyster shells. Berms are to be constructed with a soil mix of crushed oyster shells. The shells absorb the heavy metals on the ground surface. As sediment builds up behind the berms and create furrows, it collects runoff carrying nutrients and seeds of self-colonizing plants to grow over and secure the berms. These plants have a role of extracting, decomposing, and locking the contaminants in the soil. And as the she oaks grow, become established, their roots become strong enough to break through the concrete and draw up the groundwater from the substratum, achieving our goal of creating a filtering root network. So system 2.1, we introduce our first harvest of kelp. So ropes fuzzy with kelp interlace the elbow of White Bay Power Station. We are here. The kelp is harvested. At this point of time is unsuitable to be eaten, have absorbed the stormwater toxins. However, they may be used by a UTS program, which is developing microalgae plastic made from, known as bioplastic. It's again exploring how contaminants can be dealt with as a nutrient rather than an impediment. So system 1.3 moves us onto the glebe island, just here on the concrete apron. The concrete edge is cut and then salvaged to construct gate-in walls. Against the coastal air, the wire meshing corrodes. The gabion walls have a lifespan of 100 years before they crumble to form dikes, which captures sediments as the tide rises, and aquatic species also seek respite in the troughs before they're dredged into aquaculture beds. As the sea level rises 2 meters, we move into phase 2, propagate. We introduce the system sow, delight, reap, light. So back at the forecourt of the White Bay Power Station, we explore how we may utilize the infinite resource of microalgae with children's drive to play to generate a closed loop playground lighting strategy. The playground is perched on the oyster mix field that we created in phase 1. And we developed a playground design which has a canopy standing over the playground, which grows algae. Beneath the canopy, we have 4 main sets of play equipment. We have, as children mount and hang from the climbable signage, caper through the jumping forest, launch and fly amongst the jungle vines, and hide and seek amongst the green rooms. They are in fact pumping CO2 from the nearby WestConnex tunnel into the system to grow algae. The heat generated from the photosynthesis process is captured to power the playground. So during the day, as the sunlight shines through the algae canopy, it creates a dappled light which scatters across the surface across the day. However, I realized that nearby buildings were a threat to potentially create a shadow. So our design response to that was to create 5 separate panels that would shift and then be able to maximize the growing capacity of the algae canopy during the day. So phase 3 is our final phase. It is infiltrate. Now that the sea has risen, we introduced the system 3.1, intercept the flow. We are focusing on the existing canal, which is close to the forecourt of the White Bay Power Station. And it is proposed that by this whole area will be inundated by a 3-meter rise of sea level. We explored how manipulating the landform would respond with that rise of sea level, and creating a dike not only to manage the harbour water infiltrating the land, but also manage the stormwater flowing out, retaining it before it flows into the bay. And creating a new habitat, a tidal lagoon. The lagoon will see the flourishing of microalgae. The algae is a primary food source for a range of small critters for within the retention of the water and the release. So we finally come to system 3.2, encounter your food. So again, at the apron of the concrete apron at Glebe Island, where the water has finally reached water quality levels where we can now grow and consume food. Water has well and truly infiltrated the aquaculture beds that we formed in phase 1. We come to a moment where aquaculture is fully enacted as a public-private partnership, exploring the opportunities of integrating recreation and wastewater management. A network of paths through and between the kelp beds provide public access and recreation. It is both ornamental and productive. The proposal includes 4 edge types, which allows the public to observe and participate in aquaculture. First, we have our rock shelf where critters can hide and dwell. The second is a jetty designed to allow sunlight through and enable seagrass to grow below. And third distributes the municipal wastewater from the development of the adjacent beds, from the adjacent development into the beds. And the fourth is a permeable gabion wall, which acts as a substrate for habitat regeneration. There is an opportunity to process 3 million litres of wastewater from the proposed adjacent development, designed to be a closed loop system utilising rich nutrient wastewater to fertilise and feed the production of kelp. All species have a role and work symbiotically to move the nutrients through the system. We began today by, to wrap up my presentation, by introducing low-fi, low-cost moves such as harvesting kelp to deal with the contaminated discharge into the bay. We then constructed oyster berms to capture surface runoff, remediate and build soil, and grow a forest of she oaks. We crumbled the concrete apron, allowing intertidal habitats to re-emerge, and proposed a playground design which grows its own light by combining the driver play with the cultivation of algae. And we created new brackish ecologies to retain and release stormwater runoff. And then finally introduced an aquaculture system, a performative ecology, enriched by the interdependency of multiple species. So can the collaboration between aquaculture and the public realm provide food, ecology, waste management, joy, and beauty? How can toxic soil and water regenerate into tidal habitats? Can aquaculture offer resilience in city making to sea level rise? And what if site limits became site opportunities of regeneration? So that concludes my presentation. I think I may have gone a little over
No,
your
you're
9
okay.
minutes,
You're okay.
but I wrapped it up.
Hey, thank you. That's
Thanks for having
it's
me.
extraordinary to see again what last year.
Mm,
We're going to keep moving on.
Please.
Sorry to say. And I wanted to ask our two tutors, actually, I mentioned this before. Ben, do you want to jump somewhere we can see a little bit more? Ben knows these 3 projects from last year because we were lucky enough to have Ben tutoring with us last year as well. Just somewhere we can see. And I wanted to ask Ben just to sort of top line these 3 projects from your memory. Just the things to look out for.
Well, I remember last year we were online, so we couldn't see all of these at the same time. It was like someone would tell you, you'd be getting a message like, you got to check out Sherelle's project afterwards. And so these 3 projects were all lovely, and it's super generous of all 3 of them to come back and share it with you, and in different parts of the world and in person. It's really great, and they all approach the site at the time in a really thoughtful way. I know that's so hard to wrap them up, but they were just a really beautiful and thoughtful project, and they've kind of stuck with us all for the year. Like we'll bring them up in conversation over the last 2 weeks. We just talk about them, which is a great credit to them.
Yeah, could you top line the 3 projects?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
just in like go about 1 word for each.
One word. What is the answer? Kelp. It's the saying of Louis is societies grow great when old men plant trees whose shade they shall never sit in, which is a lovely thing. And sorry, Louis, I probably just stole your moment. And Sands was a lovely project. That I told my group last week. I think someone cried, shed a little tear when he was presenting last year. So just yeah, emotionally, I was trying to say, but just so beautiful and thoughtful. So that's another way to wrap that up.
Brilliant. Hey, thank you for that. And now, can you 2 have a little relationship changing over to Sam, just to swap? And while you're doing that, Helen, I just wanted to bring you into frame.
Yeah.
For a second, Helen, I just meant to bring this up before. We had a little conversation about consultation, community consultation, and potentially. And Helen, where do you work? What do you do? And just give.
Seem to have lost sound.
Just know when you've got sound back. Good.
Yeah, Patrick.
Cool. Thank you. Helen, thank you. I just wanted to bring you in a little bit on that and your type of experience. And I've also asked Helen to synthesize these sessions for us on the whiteboard. So she's going to quietly write down some things we might all be picking up as top line points. Thank you, Helen. So Sam, over to you in Tenterfield. Where's Tenterfield? Where is it?
Northern Tablelands.
Can
you hear me?
We can hear you, Sam. Go for it.
From Tenterfield.
I just missed a fair bit of audio, so I think hopefully I didn't miss anything important. But
No,
I'll be recorded. You're the most important thing. Go for it.
Okay, cool.
8 or 9 minutes, Sam. Hate to cull you like that.
no, I think I'll have to just quickly. Is that full screen for you guys?
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, just to follow on from that great acknowledgement of the country at the start, I'd just like to acknowledge that our site that we studied is on Wongal and Gadigal country, part of the Eora Nation. I'd like to recognise the continued Wongal and Gadigal connection to the land and waters of the site of our studies, and acknowledge that they never ceded sovereignty. I'd also like to acknowledge all Wongal and Gadigal elders and ancestors, and also any First Nations people here today. So to begin, a passage from Shakespeare's The Tempest. Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made, those are pearls that were his eyes, nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. And this is a photo of Glebe Island in 1875. And this is Glebe Island again in 1930. And this transformation of Glebe Island from natural landmark to flattened industrial wharf formed the basis of my landscape inquiry and response. And so completely altered Glebe Island has been. Here is a lithograph of Glebe Island in 1835 at the top here. And you can see evidence of the quarries already in that blue square. And below, from the Port Authority of New South Wales, this sequence of plans reveals the incremental dissolution of the natural shape and identity of what was once an impressive 20-metre tall sandstone island. And so this is my selected site here in Orange, which is the Glebe Island of today. I chose to spend the greater part of my graduating year studying Glebe Island and its original form and the process by which it was dismantled. This project was my way of understanding how to design in a landscape that has had such violence wrought upon it. And I sort of asked, how should we memorialize this destroyed island? But also, can we create a successful, beautiful place to dwell within? And this is my design thinking and my ideas on history, representation, and the sense of place in the movement, within the movement of time. So Svetlana Boym was a touchstone for me throughout the graduating year. Her writings respond directly to the problems faced in designing in obliterated landscapes. From the context of the ruins of the USSR, Boym examined the way our past is presented to us. She argued for a sensitive, reflective form of nostalgia to deal with challenging histories. Don't clear away ruins, leave them there for them to be examined, to allow us to stay connected with our difficult past and openly talk about what we have done so we can learn and move forward. And so these ruined spaces and objects reveal significant things about us and our past. And also early in my degree, Catherine Wilson, one of my tutors, told me about Giles Clement's designs. And this garden is in France, and it typifies what Boym thinks about, I think. It's just a simple garden bed placed on the roof of a disused submarine base here, you can see on the bottom right. And what was is still there, but the garden is profound in that it offers a redemptive path out of a brutal industrial reality. And just closer to home, JMD's design of the clifftop walk at Cockatoo Island, pictured here on the right, is another landscape approach emblematic of Boym's ideas. JMD simply installed a walkway and let the existing historic landscape and its ruins do the talking. And so just zooming out a bit and focusing on social equity. Currently, if we look at the state of the harbour, swimmable places of beauty are restricted to the wealthy eastern parts of the city. Industry was focused to areas west of the bridge. So these western areas and beyond to Parramatta have the most toxic edges and harbour floor sediments. Also, regarding natural ecologies, the southern edges of the harbour don't have the same spread of wild natural edges that exist in the enclaves of the North Shore. And so taking these two things into consideration, I asked myself, could we create such a thing at Glebe Island? A wild sense of nature and even a chance to swim. And for me, there's a strong social equity argument. The new metro station at Glebe Island, as you can see that green circle there, will enable people, just for example, from Liverpool or Blacktown to cheaply access the harbour by train. And currently, apart from Circular Quay, perhaps, this is not possible. And Sydney's geography allows beautiful places to be cut off and held tightly by wealthy residents. And the proposed metro station at the Bays will bring people of Western Sydney cheaply and efficiently to the water's edge. And to me, I thought this was an opportunity to bring like beautiful, wild and remote places that are found in the eastern beaches and coves just right to the Bays precinct. And just for a sketch, I visualized this idea. So this is what we have now, and this is what we could have. The metro station is here on the right in that white square. In the industrial landscape is maintained, and through the simple use of spoil from the WestConnex tunnelling, dunes have been created on top of the concrete apron here at the front. And so this feasibility montage got me excited in seeing a combination of the site's industrial history and the creation of a unique, novel, and perhaps restored dual ecology. And this definitely looked like Shakespeare's concept of the rich and the strange, a landscape changed but still the same. And so from my design experimentation and research, and following the ideas of Caroline Pidcock, and thanks Caroline, these are my 3 design principles: a place that is culturally rich through the representation of its challenging history through materiality and form, a place that is ecologically restorative through the recreation of coastal ecologies, and finally a place that is socially just in that its main intention is to create a beautiful space that is easily accessible to all residents of Sydney. And so I'll just go quickly through the site and just some analysis. And so what I saw at Glebe Island was that the most important aspect was the underutilisation of land. And so of the 26 hectares shown here, only a small amount in the purple is actually being used. The edge is active, but only portions of it are actually being used for an active port. And a lot of the areas are fenced off, and a lot of the portside activity is in this awkward liminal space that exists between use and disrepair. There are also these areas in green that are fenced off, and they hold a number of interesting novel ecologies. And so here's the island's indicative original landform, just superimposed on the current landform. And from the previous slides, you can see that most of the underused and liminal space exists beyond the border of the original landform. And this had me thinking, instead of trying to reclaim the island, could we reclaim the negative of the island, the artificial apron, and create a park on the unnatural ground? And so this was basically this central design move to start and help me form my structure plan. So essentially I proposed a new suburban area that maintains its industrial form, incorporating extensive affordable housing. And as you can see, Glebe Island's unnatural apron is the site of a new park. 2 coves and a headland beach exist at each end of the island, and a central active transport highway transects the site and connects to a refurbished Glebe Island Bridge. You can see at the bottom right there at number 18. And importantly, shipping is maintained through the use of conveyors, so it'll still be an active port. The proposed suburb and park is an uncanny mix of affordable housing, creative industries, cycleways, deconstructed wharves, and rambling paths through reinstituted urban ecologies. And significantly, the original footprint of the island is defined by the string of trees you can see, with a linear sculpture faintly seen in red, which we'll get to at the end of the presentation. And so our main idea is to take the guiding principles of the apron park and slowly bring them into the new urban area, creating a suburb that is rich in history and ecology, though strange in its unique form and materiality. And just today, in my original presentation, I focused on 3 areas, but I'll just focus on one due to time, which is this cove on the left-hand side. So to start, just zooming in a bit, the proposed metro station you can see is at the bottom on the left, and you can see its proximity to the cove. And a network of paths reach the beach, surrounded by informal dune ecologies and coastal heath shrubs and trees. And this is all the result of a mixture of simple cut and fill and the depositing of spoil from the WestConnex tunnelling. And the cove here is structurally stabilised by the stacking of concrete units from the dismantled concrete apron you can see pictured at the bottom right. And so just as a sort of axo section, you can see here at high tide that the concrete slabs create a network of shallow rock pools for exploration, and they speak to the artificial reefs of Barangaroo across the harbour. But these ones are made from recycled concrete, not cut sandstone. And so I'm just going to focus again on the wharf towards the top right of this page. And I spent many days looking at this part of the site. The timber wharf has been concreted over, but it is still there. And so as shown in these original drawings, and so what I sought to do was to dismantle the wharves and add some concrete steps to create new possibilities for waterside engagement. And importantly, nothing here is added apart from the concrete steps and a few balustrades. And to me, this is a strange transformation, with the aging wharf timbers retained to heighten the sense of the landscape's history, as occurs at Pirama Park, pictured on the right there. And so moving to the east, here is just a photo of the current dramatic landscape, with dry good conveyors moving overhead. And to me, this is already a striking landscape. But with some planting and some dismantling of the concrete apron and some spoil from the tunnelling, I sort of thought this could become a strange landscape of functioning industrial use and also deeply complex dune ecologies, perhaps with the added risk of snakes. And I feel this image represents my main intention in distorting elements slightly to reveal the landscape of strange potential. And so I'm just going to jump now just to the end, just talking about a sculpture that I proposed. So the park's suggested reuse of materials and the maintenance of the industrial form are keen reminders of what has happened to the landscape. But the question still remained to me is, how can we memorialise the landform to remind people of what was there? And I've been understanding our relationship to landscape as a dialectical one. People change the landscape and vice versa, creating a complex web of influence that brings us to the landscape we walk on today. And this is particularly true in highly modified landscapes like those at Glebe Island. So I thought to simplify this notion graphically and create a sculpture that represents this idea. The trusses would be weathered steel to get that rusted finish, and there would be steel wiring to represent the human landscape dialectic. And so the sculpture would follow the outline of the original island, but be recessive as well as it will sit amongst the trees. And for scale and the interrogation of this idea, I created a scale model, as you can see here, of the sculpture. Paths would weave in and out of the frames, amongst the forest of Angophoras, Banksias and eucalypts. But this doesn't completely solve the memorialization of the form of the island. I thought, could a run of lights be the solution? On the sculpture, install a line of lights at different heights, outlining the old topography, so at night the island would haunt the city, a reminder of what we have done to the landscape since invasion. So daytime would feature this sculpture as pictured here, and at nighttime the sculpture would become alight with the original topography. And so this idea captures my design intentions the most. And as quoted above, my intention was to be like a pearl diver who descends to the bottom of the sea, not to excavate the bottom and bring it to light, but to pry loose the rich and the strange, the pearls and the coral in the depths, and carry them to the surface. So our site was called A Wasteland by Many, but it is in fact a complex ocean of treasures that we can bring to the surface, bringing to light our troubled relationship with the land since invasion, and offer a haunting beacon to help us find a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, as poetic as ever. I think I might still be wiping my tears. I'm sorry to move this so quickly, but I ended
No, okay, sorry, a bit over, yeah.
You did super well to abridge that. Everyone, these were originally 20-minute presentations, so these three students have done a cracking job to halve them up. Louis, over in the UK, do you want to take over the screen for us? Louis in Hull, walking along the coast, seeing lots of industry, I believe.
Hello.
Hello, you're with us.
How are we? Yes, there's a lot of BP oil refineries here that kind of dot the coastline, so it's kind of, I don't know,
Mark
fitting
in
that
the room is
I'm
very
tuning
happy
in.
about that. Mark is from BP.
All right, good.
I think I've thrown you two in a group together later.
Always very strategic, Patrick.
Take it away, Louis.
All right. So, I'm on the wrong page. Get that full screen. All right. So, yeah, the title of my project was Shade We Shall Never Sit In. And the title was inspired by this quote, which Ben mentioned earlier. A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. This was my question. How can a long-term phytoremediation project be realised despite changing future political interests at White Bay? And I was motivated to answer this question after I heard a comment made by Premier Perrottet that the White Bay Power Station is a shocking building that should be knocked down. This prompted me to consider the shifting political dynamic that surrounds the site. Over the last 100 years, many political shifts have occurred within the New South Wales government, and consequently, many different visions for the bays have been put forth. This instability suggests that we need more than an ecological solution to realise a long-term remediation project at White Bay. So 2 equations were suggested. The first one, social, a socially interactive territorial community, keeping in check the shifting political dynamic. We can think of the local community eating away at the site's toxicity. In this project, a framework was developed which led to 4 rules being established. Then these 4 rules were applied in design. I'll explain this further, but firstly, I'll present some just quick preliminary analysis to ground the project. So in the power station, we have a history of community work on site, which has left a variety of toxic contaminants. Various contamination combinations follow the patterns of industrial use, the different industrial uses across the site, which can be organized by specific lots. You can then separate these lots out to understand the treatment methods that each requires. The site can be understood through the layers of landform, contamination layers, and the concrete apron acting as a cap. Then the urban form above, with various forces of water shifting and moving between these layers. Now, thinking about the local street network of Balmain as an engagement catchment for community involvement, I won't get too much into this, but yeah, just about inviting the presence of the community onto the site. And yeah, so with this planning framework, I'll lead you through its process of development with the 2 equations mentioned before in mind. So the project used an Inner West residence lifespan of 82 years as a time marker. And this was done with the aim of bringing greater understanding to the long-term timeframe of the site's remediation. Based on the level of contamination, we can understand the varying remediation timeframes at different areas of the site. For example, some areas would become remediated immediately and available for use, whereas other areas may take up to 4 Inner West resident lifespans. These are black holes, as I call them, and they are above Australian standard levels of leachable toxicity and need to be contained away from the public. So from this, diagrams were worked up showing the community territory eating away at the site's toxicity, visualizing the social and ecological equations. This diagramming led to a series of structure plans, and I use the term nudges here, nudges to suggest more open-end outcomes that the community has more control over. So these nudges are at 0.0 lifespans existing. At number 1, we have the staged demolition of the light industrial block. And number 2, to retain 2 front of block buildings for reuse. And number 3, to retain 10 back of block buildings for commercial and hospitality reuse. And at number 4, the metro station construction is beginning. Now at 0.1 lifespans, we have the reuse of back of block buildings. And currently the White Bay Brewery is a tenant of one of these industrial buildings and does a roaring trade on weekends, with the car park behind being adapted as a spill out area for food trucks and the like. And yeah, so the brewery's success gives real evidence to support further reuse of these buildings. There are a series of other nudges across other lifespan stages, but yeah, there isn't time to get into them in detail. But now viewing this framework playing out in section across these lifespan stages, we see the site's toxicity in red being eaten away at by phytoremedial processes and increasing community territory being introduced in the yellow. Over time, recreational program and development is introduced. So now the development of this structure plan led to these 4 framework rules. 1, to give priority to phytoremediation processes. 2, to integrate intergenerational program over time relating to the demographic breakdown of Balmain. And rule number 3, to introduce development and circulation to enhance natural surveillance of the remediated areas. And number 4, to aspire to uncover and retain historical memories of site for future generations. So this timeline shows many different data points which could potentially be measured across the project's evolution, whilst the political dynamic shifts. Now, in particular, I want to talk about the environmental shifts expected with increasing flood events and sea level rise. So at 2.0 lifespans, we see the high tide level has risen 2 meters as predicted by the IPCC, and the area north of the power station, Robert Street, and the immediate shoreline of White Bay being potentially inundated. Now looking at the Sydney Harbour scale, we see the 2 metre sea level rise as the white dashed line infiltrating the contaminated fill areas in red, which litter Sydney Harbour today. This could be a health concern for local harbourfront communities and for the water quality of Sydney Harbour. So this casts a shadow on typical remediation practices of brownfield sites across Sydney of capping contaminated material, particularly at harbourfront sites, but suggests precedent for an alternative no-cap solution. Here we see Café de Cervelle in Amsterdam, where a boardwalk network allows public access to the area as the land beneath is remediated. Community program is introduced and the remediation of site itself becomes program for the local community and a spectacle for eco-tourists visiting Amsterdam. So now I will explain how this planning framework could be applied in design. With these two equations at the front of mind, we'll apply this framework to the areas most contaminated and potentially most impacted by sea level rise. So this is just a speculative plan at 2.0 lifespans, which shows the above Australian standard black holes that I mentioned earlier in the structure plan framework. They are contained within soil building chimneys, which I'll get into shortly. A vehicular grade share path allows services and materials to move through the site, and boardwalk paths which service the remedial mass planting areas lead off this pathway spine. Spill-out areas surround the power station, which has been readapted as a cultural centre, for example, as a museum or a gallery. And tree species are planted in a regular plantation-like manner, remediating the contaminated field beneath and providing shade and identity for the cultural centre area above. So now thinking of this area and planting into the future, we have two distinct zones to the plantation. The northern side of the plantation is likely to experience higher salinity as tides rise, and there is less contamination here, but it is more prone to flooding. This suggests that a casuarina swamp forest ecology be imitated here. And now to the south side of the site, there exists lower salinity, being less impacted by rising tides. That 2 metre rise that the RPC predicts, and it is less flood prone but more contaminated than the northern side, suggesting an open eucalypt forest imitation ecology, which would allow eucalypt root systems to reach deeper depths than the casuarina and perform a more robust remedial function. So getting into the planting detail of these lifespan stages, we have planting blocks of 20 square metres. It's fair to propose that the planting blocks would change in species type and percentage over time as the level of toxicity and tidal influence would change the growing environment. At 0.1 lifespans, we see the high rotation phytoremedial block introduced. These are like pioneer blocks and are able to be slashed and bagged every 6-12 months and then processed for growing medium to be reintroduced to the site. So this is really like a high rotation, trying to get contaminants out of the site as quick as possible. And at 0.5 lifespans, we see the hybrid transition block, the Casuarina glauca being planted once the top 500 millimetre of soil has been remediated and more native ground covers are introduced. The local community being more involved now in the ongoing maintenance of the site and building a sense of ownership. At 1.0 lifespans, we see the Casuarina swamp forest imitation block being realised. The increasingly saline environment is being stabilised by the root system of the Casuarina, allowing for the other plantings to thrive and continue a remedial function in a companion relationship. Contamination could be significantly reduced now, meaning that rising tides do not pose as much of a threat to shifting leachable contaminants. Now, understanding this process in context, on the Robert Street side of the power station, at 0.0 lifespans, the construction phase is taking place, and we have these rules being applied as well. I won't get too much into that, but at 0.1 lifespans, the metro station and commuter link is introduced. At 0.5 lifespans, a community engagement program invites a closer hand in managing the site, and an equitable access boardwalk network provides an infrastructure for the public to access the area. And at 1.0 lifespans, the historic rail line is retained and inset into the commuter shareway, reminding future commuters of the previous power station industrial story. So now thinking about these black holes I previously mentioned, the over Australian standard areas have been contained in soil building chimneys to minimise exposure to the public. A feature seat integrates with a soil chimney amongst a network of raised boardwalk paths, and the original power station chimneys can be seen in the distance. The remedial processes are active at the top, and the still cladding wraps the soil chimney like a kebab of sorts that can be unraveled in layers from the top as the internal toxic material is remediated and the soil chimney reduces in volume. The remediated material can then be moved out into the broader project as soil medium. And yeah, that's me tying up. Just thanks for everyone who collaborated. I think that's a great thing about the project, just get everyone involved as you can. And yeah, thanks Patrick and Ben for putting on a good course.
Thanks, Louis. All three of those projects just captivating. The imaging of some very complex issues is astounding. We're going to keep moving this. We will refer back to all three of these projects later this morning. Sarah Haran from the Newcastle City Council. There you are. You bumped in. I saw you earlier.
Hello.
Hello. And as you can see, we're pacing along. And you've
Yes.
generously offered to present the council's vision of Carrington. So everyone, just move yourself in your chair. We're jumping from White Bay on Sydney Harbour, the deepest, largest harbour in the world, an excellent place to put a city, to the shores of Newcastle, a shallow estuary that somebody found coal, and that they needed to work out how to get that out of there and send it to the rest of the world, where it does, in fact, as with the wheat, feed and heat and cool the rest of the world. So there is something incredibly noble about that. Trouble is, it's on a very shallow estuary, which is now dredged 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is an extraordinary conundrum, I think, going ahead, not least of which with the forecast of sea level rise. So, Sarah, we are very interested to see what the council has planning for the township of Carrington. And I do realise that our students last year had a great several weeks to delve into the sort of concepts of dealing with time, et cetera, and it's something where the current students are stepping through that path right now. So let's see your I would love to see your presentation.
No worries,
Over to
I'll
you.
share my screen. What I will say before I dive in, and I'll try and get through these slides really quickly, is that this is a project that has happened. So it's less of a view or a plan than a this is what we did in response to some of the issues we have in Carrington. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yep, cool. So Carrington Local Centre is a project we've worked on over the last few years. It's part of the Local Centres programme at City of Newcastle, which covers 48 local centres across the city. And we have prioritised our centres by need for infrastructure renewal. Carrington was the first centre we addressed. We started back in 2015 in response to some fairly major infrastructure issues and a lot of grassroots push from the community. So they weren't happy with the state of their local centre. One of the main drivers for the project was poor drainage caused by tree root damage in the street. So if we have a quick look, here's our site in the red rectangle on what was known as Bullock Island back in 1871. So you can see it's basically just an island in an estuary. And this is an image of how the suburb developed, very low lying with a lot of industry around it. So it's a heavily contaminated site. We know there's a high water table and groundwater salinity. Because it's so flat, it makes it really difficult to drain. There's a lack of gradient to get pit and pipe drainage working properly. And high tides, as they go up and down, can actually block the drainage outlets. So this image here actually shows a gate across one of those outlets to stop the estuary water backing up into the pipe system. So drainage for the suburb is pretty tricky. So these are the sorts of complaints we were getting from our community. The big fig trees that council in its wisdom had planted in the street in the late I think it was the 80s or 90s, had grown beautifully, lots of lovely shade, but they were destroying the infrastructure and lifting up the curb and gutter, and the water in the gutter simply couldn't flow anywhere. The infrastructure was in terrible condition, as you can see from this image. There were issues also with just the streetscape generally, its legibility. So this traffic calming threshold installed in the 1990s was confusing, and people thought it was a pedestrian crossing and were using it that way. And we had 90-degree angle parking, but the roadway wasn't really quite wide enough for everything to fit, so it wasn't entirely safe for drivers reversing in and out. But there was a lot to like. So wide footpaths, convenient shops and services, quirky street furniture, and a lovely village atmosphere. Heritage, lots of nice heritage buildings and outdoor dining. And of course, the trees and shade were highly valued. So with these likes and then problems in mind, and looking at the design constraints of contamination, a high groundwater table, the fact it's flat and difficult to drain, and overhead power, we went to the drawing board and came up with some design solutions. So the main solution for drainage was to avoid pit and pipe drainage as much as we could, partly because of obviously the difficulties in getting the gradient to make that work, but also we didn't want to be digging up trenches and disturbing the contaminated material underneath. So we went for an infiltration solution and installed rain gardens and porous gutters, which you can see in this image. And I took this photo on the weekend after a pretty heavy downpour, and you can see there's very little standing water in the street. So this infiltration approach is highly effective, much to the surprise of some of the residents who were a bit sceptical. So we've put back trees and gardens. Unfortunately, we had to take out the existing figs to fix the infrastructure, but we've put trees back. We put them in raised planters to lift them up a bit out of the high groundwater table, just to give them some longevity, knowing that potentially that groundwater table is going to keep rising with sea level rise. We also installed drip irrigation for the trees to get the landscaping established nice and quickly. And, you know, the trees are really looking quite good. For the parking, we retained the 90-degree parking, but we got in an extra metre of road width when we did our reconstruction. And we also made it a 40-kilometre-an-hour zone, so just improving safety for vehicles reversing in and out of spaces. And the 40k zone obviously helps pedestrian safety as well. And we put a clearly marked pedestrian crossing at each end of the commercial area. We retained the unique character of the suburb, so we kept the unique furniture. We interpreted the heritage buildings. We installed flagstone effect concrete paving, and we kept the nice wide footpaths. And all up, I think it's been, you know, a really great result. In total, it was a $3 million upgrade completed in 2019. And if you would like further information, we've got plenty on our website at this address here. And that's it for me.
Sarah, thank you so much. I know you need to dash away. We will refer back to that presentation, no doubt, over the next hour and a half. So could I ask everyone to leave this Teams room and join your group redemption game room, which will be on another, if you go to your Teams, to your calendar, it should be there as another invite. Online people, if you could do that, that's straightforward. In-person people, do you want to jump to your table pod? And yes, what a brilliant idea. And I do see there's a few people joining us, Cameron at Earps Brothers Distillery. I think you're still there. I'm not sure if Chels is still has joined us. Chels, are you with us yet? No, we are going to jump into a game. I will explain it in the next room. Just if you get lost, come back to this room and we'll redirect you. Do you think I need to say something else? Yeah.
There'll be 7 rooms.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there'll be 7 rooms. It's everyone. So everyone's got a name on the invite. Everyone's got. It'll just go straight to you. I don't. You need to explain. Do I? Oh, good thinking. So everyone, students, it's on Teams. There's a sheet and stakeholders, it was emailed to you. It's an attachment to an email about a design game. I am going to be verbally jumping around your groups. So I am rather hoping to be talking you through as we go at the same time. So I will explain this as we go. But you've got about 2 minutes to get to those other rooms. So we'll see you in the other rooms. Thanks all. Two, numbers, tables with numbers on them. Thank you. And Chelsea's group, Chelsea will tend to be with us. But I'm going to cut them out. What room is what number is? Who is in Mark Murray's group? Group 2. Where is group 2? Follow Mark. I'm following Jenny. Maybe group 5 is up here. Next, table number 2. Following you. Table number 2 is over there. Table number 1.
Where are you? All right, you're gonna your chair on this one. Oh, you're no worry. You're with me. Yeah.
Everyone, you've only got about 2 or 3 minutes left, so keep it moving. Only about 1 or 2 points each. Hello, this is who's please, do you mind? I'm just going to lead you out of this. I'm Yashi. Who is here? Is this everyone left in general?
Yeah.
Rat it. Who's left? Students in this room have James McGill.
Some people might be in both.
James McGill, are you in James McGill, are you a school teacher? James McGill. I think James McGill is in the other room, so that's fine. Are there any students here just sitting in 2 rooms? Ben, I think this is okay. I think they're all sitting in 2 rooms. Everyone got about 1 minute left.
So I think that's certainly one that might be worth thinking about. And the impact of port activities is an interesting one, I think. I would say the port expansion. And thinking about 100 years, it's hard to imagine what materials will be going through the port in 100 years. It's not likely to be anything that's going through there now. And so expansion of port activities by another 50%, it might not need the same footprint that it's got even today for its 50% to do its 100%, depending on what it is that it's sending through the port. So that noise, more traffic, but then it has a good move for craft on the waterways.
Sorry, is your mic on?
Oh, opportunity for it. So I think that's an interesting one as well. But there might be others that you guys interested in or concerned about as well.
30 more seconds to run on Dell.
So, what does that mean? Like, they don't put in context. If we're building a place, or, how do we then develop that relationship?
If you're ready to start, if you're ready to be on the side, start now.
It does yeah. You know what? But yeah, grading stuff. Like education environments, because I know it's one of the leading factors of places. Like if we don't teach the kids as soon as like 5 onwards. Like,
He's online.
If we can get the extra measures in there, we can sort of ensure that we're playing in the different umbrella, the contamination is not going to be an issue.
Okay, so how do we run this decide together? Stakeholders and students must decide on a brief that reconsiders the site in this new light. Must consider 100 years, must consider stage, this will entail the overarching principles and the deliverables. Pick 2 key complementary principles. Okay, so is that the sea level rise and the impact on what activities as we discussed? Yeah.
That sort of cultural mediation is good, you know, is hard to do in such a fragmented.
So it must consider the next 100 years. How much freeboard is there from sort of high tide to the site? Is it you know, a metre above? Is it a plain ground that we're talking about?
On the side, so start to run on the reef of the next 100 years, focusing on two what you want to come to, and if you can do it in stages, you've only got 3 minutes. Many minutes to design it.
Okay, so in 100 years, we're expecting that this site's going to be inundated.
Maybe that's all.
Okay, so two key blocks of the concern. This is where you're left.
When you say I would say like this is some of
Okay, and then in terms of port expansion, this is land that sits within the port's control, is it? So that interesting. Okay, so is what's going to happen in 100 years? Well, in 100 years, big chunks of the site probably aren't going to be suitable for anything much, are they? Other than that rehabilitation, with, you know, with mangroves or you know other forms of vegetation.
Stop the port or transform the business operate to some other uses. Because eventually the sea level rise is going to
Still following me.
Residential areas in Carrington, and is there any possibility for us to go for a more environment that approach that we sort of move the residents and
The Greater Cities Commission is looking at Newcastle now, you know, in addition to Sydney, and they're sort of looking at Newcastle and thinking about its opportunity for an innovation district in that area. And the discussion paper that they've put out fairly recently talks about thinking about energy generation and energy research as being perhaps the innovation district that a place like Newcastle would support. So moving out of coal as a source of power, moving into renewables as a source of power. So yeah, you start then thinking about the imports and the exports and the handling of materials and something that industries might need, then I don't know, maybe that provides some sort of an opportunity for the non-inundated land in this area.
One more minute on finishing the brief. 1 more minute on finishing the brief. 1 more minute on finishing the brief. 1 more minute on finishing the brief. 100 years.
Sorry, get Patrick screaming at us in the background. We've got 1 minute. So let's have a look. it's probably nice not to give away.
Everyone in this group is kind of stuff moving into the design phase.
But I mean, like, they have made that.
You're all doing very well. It's time to be in the design phase.
Okay.
Transition. You're doing very well. It's time to be in the design phase.
We had another one. Yeah. Right. Okay. Are you happy with this?
Yes, whether or not the board doesn't need a land it's because it's dealing with different materials and different ways of moving those materials. Maybe some of the compromise is that you do let sea level rise take its natural course in the area, and some of the port land actually becomes regenerative rehabilitation of mangroves or other things, and you work the land that doesn't get inundated. You work that harder for some of these new industries that are likely to emerge around renewables and those sorts of alternative sorts of power generation.
Environmental objectives, as well as increasing the housing, as well making it a place where people want to live, people want to visit, I guess.
Yeah, so the dredging's being done to clean out the sediments and whatever that come up or get deposited by the Hunter River. So yeah, an extra metre of water due to sea level rise, probably changes some of that dynamic, but it's probably, well, it depends what's coming into the port, doesn't it? Is it the same sorts of boats that you're getting here now, and with the same depth that they need, or is it smaller, lighter, different sorts of boats that come in? I don't know. But maybe that's an opportunity that's worth exploring a little more. Well, aquaculture, tidal influence on aquaculture, things like oysters. Now, oysters might not like the environment that's there in the Hunter River at present because of all the industrial activity and the contamination that's on the site. But if there's remediation of all of that and uses change, to non-polluting types of uses, possibly it is somewhere where aquaculture could occur. Super messy.
Super messy.
We'll draw the short straw or the long straw.
Please come.
Oh, you present, yeah. No, we do it from the laptop, wherever you're sitting. Okay, so we don't have to move or anything.
I really hope. I really. I deal with that again. Yeah. I can't deal with that. It's just so. Yeah. This is like.
That is.
Like, we're all like.
That with a shot. I don't know what to talk about.
Well, I know. It's so long.
Okay. Let's bump through this. Everyone, no one should feel under pressure at all. Much at all. The point of this exercise is about a negotiation of values. I'm almost guaranteeing that no one quite got to a smooth resolution of that. Jamie Ripper, it's a delight to see you there off your sick bed. Thanks for joining us. Jamie's with the water research area of UNSW, and he'll be part of the plenary session in a minute. We're just going to close up this redemption game. Could I ask group one, whoever's from group one, chosen presenter to
spend 1 minute.
To spend 30 seconds to 1 minute, telling us where you got to, main points, and you will click into the general chat. Is this how we see this? How do we see it on screen? You're going to share your screen. Is that what you're going to do? Okay. Alex is going to share your screen. And so could we have group two getting ready for that, et cetera, 3, 4, 5. I'd like to close this session at 15:15 and move to the plenary. So literally, we've only got a few minutes.
Shorter, better.
Yeah, shorter, better. Shorter, better. What is it? Here for a good time, not a long time.
Just talk to it.
Yeah, you do.
Don't worry about sharing screen.
Oh, okay. Do you want me just to?
Can you just come and hold? Come and hold it in front of that thing. Do that. Come and hold it in front of that. I love old technology. Right?
Well, I don't have the little sketch, but I can just talk about it.
Talk to them.
Yeah. Okay. Hello. So our idea, I guess, we were looking at was the main issues we found were, I guess, the lack of balance or, lack of balance between the ecology and the port sort of systems. And then also there was the issue of sea level rise, of course, and how that's going to impact everyone having to move, essentially. So I guess our response to that was trying to think of a way that we can benefit both the people and the ecology. And so to do that, we were thinking if we sort of created a more reciprocal relationship between, say, the Carrington community and another community, say, more inland, so that when there's these sea level rise events or large storms or things like that, and infrastructure and all these services are sort of cut off in Carrington, that the people can move to this other community and have that sort of relationship and vice versa. And that also, the fact that we're allowing a bit more room for the fact that we're sort of allowing a bit more space for
nature to do it.
Yeah, that's it.
Annika, who would be a key stakeholder you'd need to persuade, or some other thing in the next?
I think
30,
probably
50
the
years?
port would be the biggest thing because we're essentially saying some of their services they're not going to be able to operate all the time.
100% of the
Yeah,
time, maybe
so
95%.
Interesting. Thank you. Controversial. Wish the port were here. Number 2 group. Thank you. Number 2 group. Who is our talker? Jen, is it you? Do you want to come round to here? Can people online hear this madness in this room? That was okay. Good. Jan, do you want to line yourselves, these two, just as long as you can be seen,
Yeah.
sort of there? You're good?
Yeah, we had,
Tell us who was your stakeholder? Maybe introduce yourself. The first stakeholder was Carolyn Pidcock, architect. Second stakeholder in group number 2 was
we had Mark, from BP, not BHP, as I mistakenly said multiple times. And Chris, which is a really nice sort of balance between the two. Like
Chris,
meeting minds.
local Newcastle landscape architect.
Yes, and also Delpratt Gardens.
And Delpratt Gardens, who's worked on remediation.
And it was so interesting hearing how you two converse and the way that you see the site. And I think hearing Mark speak, I was like, wow, just so like such an interesting perspective. So we were having a look at our site. So Chris and I, Chris, and what is your last name?
Atwell.
Atwell, yeah, Chris Atwell and I are looking at the BHP site, and Elder's looking more at the residential.
BP.
So, so it was like a sort of, we were focusing a little bit more on the BHP side, but we were sort of defining principles, and we came up with sort of addressing number 1, the contamination on the site, which is massive, extensive, and then also access to the site and what that access might look at. So when we were doing our tiny 30 seconds worth of drawing, we were trying to throw stuff on the table, and we were saying Mark was saying that industrial land is really hard to come by, and how important that is. And as we know, that site is up for sale. So it could be a really interesting way to preserve that. And then that also keeps that working class, like ensures that gentrification is minimised by ensuring that the working class background.
What stakeholder would you need to persuade? It's principally.
I feel like it would have to be like across.
Keep going.
I feel like it'd be like a very large scale thing. Like we'd have to get, if we were to, so what we suggested was saying, take the site as it is. It's really connected to the infrastructure. It's fortified, so it will prevent, obviously it's not, it's a Band-Aid solution as we're looking at it right now.
And we're talking about the site that's had 100 million spent on it. Chris, is that the site you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's had 100 million spent on it recently.
Yeah.
Rehab has been capped by BHP.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, it's a very interesting site.
Yeah, it is extremely interesting. And so we were saying perhaps if we were to harness that site as it is, preserve it as industry and use that for compost, and take that compost that's harnessed on site up the Hunter River where all those extractive mines are. We know soils, as State of Environment Report has identified, it's our best resource. It is our most it is so important. And it's Mark was saying that topsoil is incredibly hard to come by, especially within the Hunter River. It's awful topsoil there. So be a really good thing to look at. So perhaps I would be looking at state and federal government. I feel like this federal government is keen to commit to a lot of things, so we could use this moment in time and be like, oh, come on. And then also BHP as the site that's created all of those guys.
Love. So I'm going to push you off. But you know, Jamie in the plenary, Jamie might have some comments to that, and also Steve Driscoll from New South Wales Placemaking, who's joined us late last night at midnight. He's agreed to this. You might have some comments to that topsoil scenario up the river. Group number 3. Thank you, group number 2. Group number 3. Who are you? Where are you? And do you want to take a place here? Group number 3. Quick, you can do it.
We've already caught a pass, so.
Yeah.
Short.
And let's get group number 3, and we'll have group number 4 up here as well. In fact, let's everyone, group 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just come up here and give some top line wording. Yeah, that's actually,
Okay.
it's a party.
So we spoke with Steve. Our main 2 principles were the regenerative materials and aquaculture, I believe. So our main stakeholder would be the port industry, whoever, and changing that's such a big income to New South Wales as a whole, and also Australia. So it's quite essential to keep some kind of industry there. So changing that industry to be more regenerative materials. So essentially remediating 25 years the land that is now.
Yep.
Cutting into the land a little bit and integrating. We came up with the idea of
brilliant. I love it. We have to move on. I love it.
Next,
I'm 7 for 4.
Oh, I'm 4. Okay. I was starting with Paul 9, and then we were talking about engaging with the community and also like trying to build this identity of what's already there, and then trying to bring that into like
I'm not even sure how much the community knows about the place. So then
Interesting.
yeah. So then we were talking about how first we're gonna go with like an ecological route. So we're gonna go with the Thorsby Creek and then trying to use like the oysters to like fix up the water system. And then there's also a part like later in the phasing where we would try and blend the community and industry together and like create events, spaces where they know about how it actually works. And then also
Great.
and then something about like saying the good and the bad. So then if we're gonna do this phasing project later down the line, it's like the workers there that would be more keen to like, phase into a different type of industry, which I haven't figured out yet.
Love it.
There you
Huh.
go.
Beautiful. These are complex. Tim from local council, I'll be interested in your thoughts in the plenary session on those kind of issues. Thank you. 5. We're up to 5.
Yeah.
5.
I'm from Group 5.
Group 5.
And
Who was your stakeholder?
Timothy Walsh.
Timothy Walsh, City of
Yeah.
Newcastle.
So we were talking with Timothy Walsh and we kind of attacked him with quite a few questions.
Well done.
But Timothy kind of disclosed to us that he only, works to a 40, 50-year kind of future,
Interesting,
in planning. Whereas our assignment is kind of where most of us are looking at 100 years plus. So we really went kind of, I guess, a little utopian with the design and suggested, what if we just convinced the port to move away? And we totally gave it, the land back to the environment. And then James was also mentioning this, now gives us the opportunity to create it as an urban place where people can live, which is not, what the Department of Planning has actually really considered at all for Carrington. So yeah, it was interesting.
Interesting and utopian. Paul, no, I'll be interested on your thoughts about a 50-year versus a 100 or 200-year timescale. I'll be interested. Hey, thank you. Brilliantly summarised. Of complexity. 6. Group 6. Group 6. Group 6. Right. Who was your stakeholder?
Penelope from Lend-Lease.
From Lend-Lease, thank you.
So we're looking at how like sea level rise and maintain the use of the port, and how we can synergize to create mutual benefit. I think it was to utilise the dredging material, because without the maintained depths, the port can't be utilised, and the port cannot be operating. So inspired by Sherelle, with the reuse, remediate and repurpose that material for remediation, and improve the economic driver. And the key word was reciprocal, and how we could transform the landscape to benefit everyone. And how can we sell landscape architecture to everyone, even those?
We need Sarah in the room. She's a big
don't want public landscape areas. How can we sell that to the port, the community, and the public for reuse and remediate?
Yep, love it. First, you got to have the port in the room. It's the number one thing. You got to port in the room. Thank you. Super summary of, again, complexity. Last group, number 7.
Yeah, we
Jamie,
we're
wherever you
talking
are.
with James and Phil.
Yeah, be something like that. That's good. That's good.
So he works at the school in Carrington, and kind of we were talking about how
James is the principal, aren't you?
Yeah.
Of the school, yeah.
And we were talking about like the kind of, he said that people wear shirts, I think, that say like paradise or something. It's like a really big like community environment, and how kind of there are all these environmental issues that are now kind of coming down on them, and how these people have helped the port and what we can give back. And he was discussing how that little connection over the pedestrian bridge is one of the only points where people can access the Hunter, and like families go and watch fireworks there every year. And we discussed that Dyke Point might be a really interesting place to come back. And one other interesting thing was he was saying how at the school they do have like a little veggie patch and chickens and stuff, but that the students can see, but they're not allowed to, like, they don't sell it, they don't eat it. That like kind of produce is just gone. So kind of how Dyke Point could kind of maybe be remediated and as like a community space, and then introducing kind of environmental and ecotourism into the area alongside some port production as well.
Brilliant. Yeah. Hey, thank you. We are very much on time. Amazing. You're all amazing. I'm going to throw this. Everyone can stay exactly where they are, and we'll just have a sort of casual plenary. I'm going to throw this over to Carolyn Pidcock, and I'm going to ask all the stakeholders here to give themselves a quick introduction when they first speak. Good luck, Caroline. That's all I'm saying.
Now, how am I going to know who's online? Who? I mean, if I can see. Okay, let's start with you, James McGill.
You're up.
Yeah, great.
So how about a quick intro to you and then a quick, your sort of ideas for problems and opportunities.
Great. I actually had to look up the word plenary because I didn't know what I was getting into, and I now get to go first. How good's that? Lucky I've got the Google skills. I'm James, principal of Carrington Public School. And like Jamie summarised really well, Carrington, I've worked there for 5.5 years and lead the school community. It's a small community. And I think I like to, I don't purport to know what goes on the other side of the island. And Carrington, like Jamie reported, the Carrington community calls itself Carradise because where else would you rather be than Carradise? Like it's got its own little village atmosphere. But I think someone mentioned a few minutes ago that, we don't really know what goes on the other side of that port. There's a footpath, or one footbridge over to the Hunter River. And it seems to me there's this real disconnect with, the Hunter River, our port, Newcastle, and its actual river from Carrington, and the people that live on Carrington, and the kids that come to my school, and the parents that come and talk to me, they share that story that they go over the footbridge and join in on the river. But there's, just this industry that happens, and I can tell you when coal's been loaded onto the ships because there's more dust at my school and on the windowsills on those particular days. But it's just an industry that just keeps on going and unseen to the community. And we talk about the environment at our school a lot. We talk about what our kids, what we're hoping the students that we're teaching will go and solve the problems that's I got to see some this morning for the White Beret projects, and they were great. And that's what we want our students to do. And sea change, sea levels rising is such a big problem for lots of coastal communities, but especially, Stockton at the moment in Newcastle, where, the sea's reclaiming that peninsula and making it that a real issue. And I think I raised it briefly right at the end for Group 7, that could present a real problem for Carrington and Mayfield and the berths there if that protection's not there from that peninsula running out into the land. So, and the other thing that, it's just a big gust of wind there. Another thing that, my community's, really interested in is, how they can be, how they can be there in 100 years. If sea levels rise and they're off the island, so to speak, that's not great. That they lose their community, and I like the idea that they could have a partnership with somewhere further inland, but that still doesn't provide that sense of belonging and that real sense of community that Carrington's all about. So there's some of the things that I raised with Group 7 and raised to the plenary session this general meeting. Is there anything else you need or want?
We might get you to pop in if you have any thoughts, but I do think the idea of what is radical is changing, because radical is losing a whole town because of sea level rise and other climate change events. So, and doing what we're currently doing is going to end up in that. So maybe what we need to do is not so radical. I mean, it is, but it might be today, but not seen so in the future. So thanks, James. On that note, I might just move down to Steve Driscoll, who might have a completely different viewpoint to me about this. And so Steve, can you introduce yourself and sort of talk to the key points that you think we need to be thinking about?
Yep, thanks, Caroline. So Steve Driscoll, I'm a town planner by training, and I've worked in local government for about 10 years and then for state government, mainly for Landcom and Urban Growth New South Wales and its various incarnations. And the last few years I've been a consultant working for myself, but sort of consulting back to some of those government agencies that I used to work with. It's the beauty of a redundancy. The sorts of issues that I think are important, if you have a look behind me, sometimes it's hard to imagine change. But behind me is what is now Honeysuckle, about 30 years ago when BHP used to rule the roost. And the important thing about change, I guess, is the importance of making a start. And the whole notion of having a long-term plan. The funny thing about long-term plans is they take a long time to materialise and to be realised. But unless you make that start, unless you have an idea where you're heading in that first 10 or 15 or 20 years, you certainly won't get there. So my view or my opinion about at this place is that it's probably got 3 different futures in the time frame that you'd be looking at. It's still capable of being used for productive port activities, but the port itself is going to change in that period of time. And what comes in and out of the port and the need for dredging and how materials are handled be radically different. So it'll have continued life as a port. The group that I was in, sort of imagined new and different industrial activity on the side, or more productive uses such as aquaculture, which is probably, when remediation's done, probably quite possible. And then, beyond that, there's probably another use again that none of us have even thought about at this point in time. So I guess the important thing from an urban planning perspective is having that long-term vision, making sure that you know what the immediate steps are, and taking steps that don't lock out opportunities for future things that none of us even know what they are at this particular point in time. That's the tricky job that urban planners get trusted with by the community. Sometimes we do it well, sometimes we don't. So that's probably enough for me, because there's plenty of other people I'm sure that have got different perspectives as well. But I don't see a single future for this place. I think it'll evolve and have 3 or 4 different futures over the 100-year timescale that you're talking about.
Thanks a lot, Steve. And I think that idea that change is difficult until suddenly it happens and you go, wow, that happened. And if you think about the whole city of Newcastle, it's 200 years old, and that in the whole scheme of Australia is a very short time, really. So we can make a whole lot of change going forward. On that note, I might go right below you to Jamie Ruprecht, who might have, from an ecological or water ecology point of view, quite some interesting ideas. Jamie, short intro and key ideas.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, Jamie Ruprecht. I am based over in Manly Vale at the Water Resource Laboratory associated with UNSW. I gave a talk to some guys probably in the class there some months ago about sort of broader work that I've been doing in the Hunter for the last decade. A lot of the work that my team and I have focused on is around sort of riverbank restoration, water quality, wetland remediation, things like that. So a lot of work up in the Kooragang Island and Tomago wetlands. And, we've seen a lot of changes in the estuary over that time. And we're still seeing the estuary deteriorate in terms of water quality as well. So some of the work that we've been doing more recently has been with Hunter Water, assisting with their master planning of wastewater management in the catchment, which is, they're looking to spend in the order of $500 million over the next 10 years to sort of work out what the best ways, to protect the water quality and the ecosystem health, but also manage increasing populations and other challenges and issues for the catchment. So, there's obviously a range of issues going on the Hunter, and I was just over not to gloat, but I was just over in Spain at an engineering conference, and I talked about a yeah, this kind of radical change and this futuristic scenario that we're looking at. In terms of looking back at what we've done in the past around large-scale engineering solutions to manage flooding and get people onto floodplains, you know, for development, to really where we're at now, which is around this emergency response. So we don't even really talk about large-scale engineering responses to issues anymore. We're really talking about how do we get people out of flooding, sort of flood scenarios or whatever, in terms of very much in the first 100 days before and after the event. And so what are we looking at in the future? I mean, we have a few options, I guess, in terms of, you know, well, retreat really is not an option in terms of people just like where they live and they don't really want to make that kind of change. So we really are talking about adapting or protecting. And if we think about adaptation, there's just so much infrastructure, particularly if you look at Newcastle and the low-lying areas of the floodplain. There's so much individual pieces of infrastructure that it's almost impossible, really, to think about going forward and adapting each single piece of infrastructure now and sort of what are we adapting to? It's almost like something that you'd have to continually adapt over time, which is obviously very expensive and takes a lot of resources. So then we go to these kind of more large-scale protection options, which, you know, in the past we have these examples of, say, putting a barrage across a large estuary and doing that so as a single piece of infrastructure that protects everything behind it, which is kind of funny because my history is removing floodgates and, you know, potentially we're talking about putting, you know, large-scale floodgates back in, which is something that I never thought that I would start talking about. But then even by doing that, you know, do we go and put a large scale sort of barrage across the Hunter Estuary? And if we did that, then there are still issues that need to be addressed around that in terms of, you know, rising sea levels, you know, increasing low tide sort of levels, which prevent drainage of floodplains and other issues. So there isn't necessarily one solution, and there are radical solutions that we may need to start thinking about and planning for and putting money away so that we can start to plan for those things. But yeah, as we say, there's probably solutions that we haven't really thought about yet either. I think in terms of work that, say, Hunter Water and others are doing, they're really trying to look at whole catchment management approaches. How can they work together with different organisations and agencies to really achieve the best outcome for the estuary? And so, you know, I think there's a combination of things that probably need to be done to achieve and get where we're trying to go in the future. Just as some thoughts, I could probably talk for hours on it, but I'm trying to keep my spot short.
We might stop you there, Jamie, but thanks. And I mean, it's a very interesting thing. Do we put mankind first or do we put nature first? And, you know, and how do we manage that? On that note, I might switch to your left on the other screen, Paul Knight, who might be able to offer some other opinions and sort of particularly coming from, I think, Wollongong, but also very an Indigenous background and heritage. And wow, lots of things to think about. Paul, please introduce and key points.
Thanks. Before I start speaking, I'm actually just going to put up quickly a map if this works. Did that come up?
Yeah.
That's the predicted sea level rise in the next by 2100. The
Wow.
blue is at high tide, and you can see Carrington disappears.
Oh.
So I just wanted to throw that up quickly because I think it gives perspective on what we're dealing with here. So who am I? What am I about? Well, I wear many hats. So I'm obviously my Aboriginal identity is one of those hats. But economic development's my background and strategic planning. However, I do a lot of work in heritage, cultural heritage. I've just done some work around precinct planning with the Department of Planning, particularly looking at the Central Coast and Sydney, the Greater Sydney area, and what that looks like. So when I look at challenges like this, you know, for me, the first thing that I think of is that notion of custodianship and the notion of what is it that we're trying to achieve and to whose benefit or to whose disadvantage, I guess. And what does that mean? And it really comes back to values. When I look at any challenge that we have, looking at it through a values-based lens is quite important to me, because that's what defines, really, it'll define the challenge, but it'll also define what we think is important in that space, and the relationship that we have with that tangible or intangible item. And from a cultural perspective, tangibles and intangibles are knitted together so tightly that the landscape tells the story of who we are and what we're about. And we need to be thinking about that in this instance. And we've just heard there, you know, I support Steve's position that, you know, when it comes to moving this forward and putting on my economic hat, you got to get on with it. You can't just sit there and twiddle your thumbs and think about, oh yeah, we'll get there one day. Unless you start acting on things, you'll never make a change. The challenge here is actually, we kind of know some of the outcomes that are going to occur. You know, we've got sea level rise impacting on this site. We also have climate change, which is going to bring in excess downfalls in summer around in terms of rainfall, which you got one of the biggest catchments in the state right there. And that increased water flow into that space is going to happen in summer when sea level change or tidal change is at its largest as well. So you can have a maximum impact in those times with increased rainfall, increased tidal flows, and it's really going to inextricably change that landscape. There's no doubt about it. What we really need to be thinking of is what's important there. And I like to look at that through the lens of what is it that the relationship we have with that place. What are the things that are almost the non-negotiables? What are the things that we need to take away from there and go, these are the things that are so important that we can't let that go in any way. What's the story we're trying to tell behind that? In terms of the other, you know, when I look at this, you know, I talk about, you know, if I put on my cultural hat, I think about the agency. I think about how in Aboriginal cultural structures, nothing is more important than anything else. Everything's equally weighted in that decision-making process, and we need to be taking those things into consideration equally. But in doing that, that doesn't mean somebody misses out. It means somebody might have to bend a little, but you need to understand what is that relationship that you are foregoing in giving a little bit more weighting to something else. And how do you balance that out? Which then brings me to the idea of stakeholders in this area, and things like, okay, we've got workers there currently, we've got community living there, we've got government stakeholders, we've got business stakeholders. What are the values they're bringing into that space and place, and how do those things need to be represented in the development and positioning of this space? At the end of the day, for me, most of this just comes back to values and identity. What do we want to create? And you know, I can go on and on about this stuff. It's at so many different levels. But I might just stop there. And I think that, you know, going back to that challenge of looking at that inundation from sea level rise, how are we going to challenge that? You know, what's that mean to how you plan this space? And one thing that Steve picked up on too is this will have several life forms over that 100-year period, 150-year period, 200. The rest of our custodianship of this space, it's going to change. It'll continually change. The next 30 years isn't going to be what's going to be there in the next 60 or the 100. And understanding that place and play is really important.
Thanks, Paul. There's a lot of questions there. I don't know whether can the port continue? Is that the most important relationship, or is that?
Look, I think, you know, it's what do we value? There's a trend. The other thing you've got to remember is there's transitioning that occurs in these spaces and places, and you can't just cut off, you know, nah, port's gone, see you later, we're on the next road, because it takes years. And again, Steve indicated, you know, it could be decades before you get to the start of your next piece of work.
Sure. Okay. And I think Jamie's put his hand up and wants to say something urgently. Is that correct?
Just a quick comment, it just from some experience over recent projects. A lot of people really are focusing on this community value idea and how can they make decisions that align with community values. A challenge that we have found, you know, in terms of making a decision about which future scenario to say, you know, the wastewater planning go down. Something that's really lacking is this link between sort of engineering sort of decisions that are being made and the actual community values. You know, how do we link those two? Because there isn't a direct association with, you know, you reduce the amount of algae in the estuary by 30%, and that increases community value, you know, in terms of swimmability by 50%. You know, like those things aren't necessarily linked. So how can we start to make decisions based on community values when they're quite unrelated in some ways? You know, they're quite indirect in their relationship. So it's just something to think about, that people are starting to make decisions based on community values and trying to push in that direction, but it's quite challenging to link our engineering work to that.
Sure, Paul, go.
Sorry. So, Jamie, we've been working on this down in the Illawarra at the moment, around Lake Illawarra, actually. And
yeah, we're doing some work down there too.
Sorry?
We're doing some work down there too.
Yeah, no, I know you do the monitoring in the lake. So through a values-based decision-making process that was set up using traditional Aboriginal thinking, if you like, or custodial relationships, we're revisiting the Lake Illawarra Management Plan that's just been approved with the stakeholders to see whether changing the lens that they're looking at things and the relationship they have with place. And it is about relationship. What is the relationship they have with that? Because that's what brings the values. Does that determine a different outcome by the fact that people understand why you need to do things that may not be palatable, because overall the values of the community are lifted. And it's about that collective whole rather than the individualism.
And I think how do we encourage everyone to fall back in love with nature and make that a really primal kind of lens, hey?
Absolutely. Well, I think from the work that we're doing, that kind of falls out of that, because it's about the relationship, why you like a place.
Yeah.
It talks about that relationship with space and place.
Okay, I'm just going to switch to our real live person here.
Hello.
From not BHP, but BP.
I'm from Wollongong too, just quietly. So.
And then we'll go back to Timothy and Chris Johnston after this, but I just think we'll get an industry perspective, and please introduce yourself and your key
I'm
responses.
Work out which camera I go to.
Look to the front.
Screen. Hi, everyone. Okay, so Mark Murray, BP. I've been with BP for 20 odd years. Remediation is my background, so I look after Asia Pacific, now Africa. I've been involved in lots of redevelopment kind of sites. I think some of the big themes that come through is about change. So I've seen lots of terminals, for example, or refineries, close them down, and then watch them over time being repurposed, but doing that in a way that obviously is engaging with the community. I think everything that we're talking about today is, you might have sites that need activation, whatever, but without the community being engaged in that actively, you're not going to get the right outcome for anyone, really. So I think I was involved in one in Sydney, the Kurradah Park. So that was a site which has kind of had 100 years of history, right? So we're talking about things changing. 100 years as a terminal on the harbour, eventually repurposed for a park, which was a great outcome. So you can see landscapes have their time, move on, and I think just seeing some great examples here today where you've some really thoughtful ways of taking land currently used for certain things and then bringing the community in. And then, you know, I guess from a commercial point of view, if you've got land that's had an industrial heritage and you can continue to use as much of that as possible without degrading other land, and it's, you know, you might make that a nice green space, but then clear 100 hectares somewhere else to put a factory. So sometimes you've got to balance up what might be a nice, you know, might look great in that location, but then we actually having an impact somewhere else. So they're just some of the things that we constantly think about. I think climate resilience, hugely important topic. Whether you're in an energy company or wherever, it's I've seen some great examples. So Teesside in the UK. So Louis, you might have heard about that project. Massive redevelopment, former kind of coal, hugely industrial area that's being transformed into an energy sort of new energy project. So they're trying to support that transition. So there's some really amazing projects. Newcastle's kind of got some similarities: highly educated, competent, skilled workforce. Work hard, want to do things and have a plan for the future beyond coal. So how do you bring some of those, maybe those new energy projects forward and use that skilled workforce? So they're kind of all swirling around in my head at the moment. No answers, but I think there's real opportunities.
Yeah, I love Beyond Zero Emissions are doing a fantastic they've done a whole Hunter transition plan for moving Hunter from coal to the renewable future we need, but that still requires the port and access. So
and land, you got to do stuff. You need,
So yeah,
sticky period in between.
Okay, on that one, thank you very much, Mark. We might move to. We're going to finish on. Oh, actually, is Penelope from Lendlease online still? If you are, can you just shout out because I can't see you. Oh, great. Okay, well, we might just go to Timothy from City of Newcastle, then Penelope, and then Chris Johnston.
Is there anybody else? Is Cameron from Earth there? Distilleries, Earth Distilleries.
Okay, great. Okay, so Timothy, communities, how are you? What are you up to?
Yeah, hi everyone. So just really quickly, my name is Tim Walsh. I'm a urban planner by trade at the City of Newcastle. Yeah, look, Carrington, I've had a lot of ideas swirling around in my head while listening to everyone's points. I think what James was saying about how you've got this, you've got this community and you've got this industrial, just across the street, or is it across on the other side of a line on a map? And sometimes you don't really know what's going on there, but it's sort of, they're both existing together in this, in the Carrington sort of area. From a council perspective, we've got our plans looking towards 2040, 2041. And, just in there, we've got things such as we're going to protect the port, we're going to support the port, we're going to support freight movements, we're going to sort of plan for expansion and diversification, retain industrial land, stuff like that. And then on the other side, we've also got things like, we're going to green our neighbourhoods, protect and enhance estuaries and wetlands, reduce carbon, plan for climate change and resilience, create inclusive streets and neighbourhoods. And these two things, this is what I've been thinking about. These two things, do they really go together? Can they go together? Are they going together? At the moment, are these operating together? And Carrington's an example where you want to do these things, you want to make it this community. You also just want to support, the industry and the port. So it's just, I think that's where, the radical, there's, what's the word? The radical, what's the word? Sorry, intervention or something that we're thinking about. We do need to have that. Yeah, that's it. We do need to have that because I think one of the questions I got sent was, is the site fit for purpose? Is the site fit for purpose for a residential community into the future? Is it fit for purpose for a port into the future where we're dredging it every day? We've got this sea level rise, contamination, etc. Is it fit for purpose for both? Is it fit for purpose for only one? And can these coexist into the future? So yeah, that's sort of my reflection on today and what I've sort of been thinking about the last half an hour.
So tell me, has the council done any kind of radical plans of what would it look like if we just removed everyone off Carrington and just turned it into a high level port? Or what would it look like if we moved the ports and just sort of populated the things. I mean, are you doing those radical ideas of scenario planning at all?
Well, we've got a position paper on sort of focuses on Carrington, and then on the other side of, you know, Throsby Creek, areas like Wickham, Maryville, sort of these areas that are susceptible to sea level rise. It's a position paper, so it's not really policy per se, but we released it in 2017, and it sort of looks at options of how, you know, we know it's going to increase. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And sort of looks at all these different options, ranging from sort of do nothing to forced retreat, or, you know, strategic rezoning to non-residential uses. It sort of lands somewhere in the middle of what we're going to do, which is sort of, you know, floodgates, which I think are already starting to be implemented, you know, levies and pumps and whatnot. But, you know, it's when do we do it? Are we, you know, how proactive is the council being? Or are we going to be reactive when we just get, you know, some huge king tides, you know, we know it's getting worse. What are we where are we pulling 35 million from to do this stuff straight away? Or are we just going to wait until it gets really, you know, till it gets bad? Or
I bet Lismore Council wishes it had done a bit more pre-planning, hey? I mean, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, yeah, speaking for the council, yeah. But, you know, it's just one of those things. It's hard to get that input. It's hard to get that buy-in from, you know, everyone to do these radical things, to plan that far in the future, to know what we need to do now and what we need to do, you know, in 10, 20, 50, 100 years time. So,
but sometimes you just need to walk down radical roads just to see what it looks like. You might not end up there, you might come back, but sometimes just exploring those ideas might take you to some surprising places.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that note, I'm coming back to you, Chris Johnston, but I just want to talk to Penelope from Lendlease. Can you turn your camera on and join us, Penelope? Thanks. Hi.
Hello.
Now, can you just introduce yourself and tell us your
Sure.
thoughts on what's happening?
Sure. So Penelope Layton, I've been working with Lendlease for 7 years, multiple roles over that time. And I am stepping in for Kirsty White, who I feel would be way more suitable to this conversation. So I'll do my best. I'm an urban strategist for Lendlease, in looking at urban renewal projects specifically. And I suppose whenever we assess sites, we're always looking at risk, you know, return on investment, and also making sure that we're going to create communities that are going to thrive and have long futures ahead. So, you know, to the point that other people have been talking about, you know, it's very complex, urban renewal projects in general, not only with stakeholders, but the sort of tension we're talking about, you know, community, you know, the natural habitat, global warming, etc. You know, so as a business, we're a 1.5 degree aligned company with targets and goals for, you know, zero carbon by 2040, and anything that we deliver on has to meet those targets and goals. And I suppose one of the things, you know, we have to be really mindful of is, you know, what are the new technologies coming our way? How do we pilot that? And in Australia, how do we get ahead of the game in, you know, implementing those things with pilot projects and so on, and trial and testing things so that we can future-proof, you know, for future generations. And I guess living in Brisbane, I know all too well the global warming effects with flooding and more to come. You know, my back garden has never flooded before, and this recent flooding in February it did. So it's very real for us. And so I suppose it's just to the point that no one thing is superior to the other. We've kind of got to find something that's mutually benefit to our ecology, to our economy, and to the community. And I guess that's the tension we always have to wrestle with. And yeah, it's a big challenge for us now and for our future generations who've got to try and fix things. for us. So no real solutions other than, you know, we need jobs, we need to thrive, and, you know, for our own well-being, we need to be embedded in nature more and more, and hence, you know, the whole strategies for greening cities, because we know how important that is to ensure our mental well-being as well as our physical well-being. So
Right.
landscape students, you've got a big challenge ahead of you. Landscape is really important, I think, for the future of our urban spaces and places.
I think Singapore defining themselves as a city in a park, not parks in a city, is a really great sort of philosophy, and great for all the landscapers, but also the architects. But I just think there's many different ways we need to sort of stop siloing ideas and start working out those confluences of interest. So thanks, Penelope. And on that note, we'll go to Chris Johnston. And can you please, hello, and introduce yourself and talk to some of these key issues that I'm sure you've got so much experience in.
Hi, thanks, Caroline. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Johnston. I'm a landscape architect operating in the lands of the Pampalong clan of the Awabakal Nation up in Newcastle. And I guess my take on everything that's sort of been discussed so far today is sort of multiple. I think there's some interesting positions that landscape architects can take in terms of engagement with what's sort of been discussed. And fundamentally, I think there's a shift which has been a tenet of discussion over the last sort of 10 to 15 years around this idea of the Anthropocene, and how we've got to shift our thinking away from probably human-centered elements into something a little bit more balanced with nature and see ourselves as part of it, not just exclusive to it. I've been lucky enough throughout my career to actually work on lots of renewal or rejuvenation projects, which operate in different ways. Things from the National Arboretum in Canberra, which was all about mitigation of fire, born from those sorts of principles, through to the extension of Auckland along its waterfront, and actually currently just working on the regeneration of Foreshore Park in Newcastle, and just seeing how each one of those over different time periods have to deal with different both social perspectives but also physical perspectives and different priorities, and how they begin to spin together. And it's I think there's something that probably hasn't been mentioned at the moment that's perhaps need in terms of how it is that we begin to generate stuff and deal with stuff. And I think that when you start to begin to apply what the needs or the requirements of community, economy, environment start to bring to a project, you start to see, you start to be able to realise what these tipping points are. That will begin to start to evolve through how you begin to make those decisions at various times. Because as has already been mentioned, you know, like if you take First Nations occupation of Australia has been around for 60,000 years plus potentially. In Newcastle, there's a perspective through the local community, if I can talk about them for a little bit, where part of the sea, where it currently sits at the moment, is actually identified as their land. And because they've been here for so long, the sea has actually reclaimed that land during that period. So people have been dealing with this for a very long time. And I think landscape architects have a pretty interesting ability to be able to look at different scale and have quite an interesting conduit, being able to bring all of these things together and look at the physical world, look at the cultural world, and look at the ecological world, and start to offer some ways of actually enabling it. The last thing I'd like to bring up is I think I've been doing a little bit of work with the University of Newcastle recently, looking at a project. We've got a big thing that's happening up here where the Mount Arthur mine is being closed, which is a big coal mine up here and the largest coal mine up here. And there's a project around how communication and everybody's orientation, which we've got a great perspective and great group here today, coming from very different disciplines and perspectives, How do we actually get that information together, and how do we make that accessible for everybody else who's actually working into this? And I think that communication ability is probably key to us being able to resolve these within a time frame that are actually going to be useful.
All right.
I'll leave you with those.
Okay, well, look, I think that's bringing us to midday, which is the end of our time. Is there any burning question from anyone online or in the room that we need to address before we close? Nope. I think this is one of the most challenging projects I've seen for students, and I just think that it's a really exciting thing, because that's the reality of our current times, is there's no easy answers. And I just think that actually embracing the complexity of this and coming up with ideas, and they might not be perfect, but they might be great as well. And I just think that we've got to stop being worried about being perfect. We've just got to be really exploring good ideas with really good intention. And I'm so pleased that all of these amazing people have been able to come online and contribute, because I think together we can, and we're much more powerful as when we help each other sort of with different perspectives and different ideas, and bring those sometimes conflicting but often confluencing ideas together and coming up with the way forward, because we just have to, and we are in a world of great change. And we've just got to be able to kind of flow like water and work it out. So thank you very much, James, Steve, Jamie, Penelope, Tim, Paul, Chris, and Louis Parsons, who, what time is the day is it? And
It's 3 a.m.
3
and I've got some
a.m..
classes.
I
I've
think
got
you
some
get
classes
the
to go to in a few hours. So
and Mark here as well for being in the room. That's sensational. And also everyone else online, and my friend from Tenterfield. Is he still here, Sam? And past students presenting work, fantastic. Yeah, great. So thank you everyone, and let's make Newcastle, resilient and thriving for the future, because we can't not.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. That's
Thank
it.
you.
Over now.
Thanks, folks. See you later.
Very good.
So tricky. Well, Isabel.
So tricky.
On our plate spinning. That's the one thing of it. Hey, Isabel, it was good.
It was fun. Picnic outside in the sun. Yes, come out. Put it down. Shall we have everyone should have a photograph?
My brother worked. Bar in the day.
Yeah. Huge water.
All our fortune, basically, is disaster.
If we didn't have his photos up outside, probably have a bit of a outside to the center. Don't have a group photo.
Well.